crowds in Rostov-on-Don actually cheered for him and his troops because he's seen as wanting to toughen up Russia's approach to the war. But it caused a number of people, in particular in the elite, but not only there, as they look at Putin's leadership, which hasn't been brilliant, but they look at Prigozhin as a possible alternative. Well, it's not that surprising. I mean, he's been sent off into exile, and I assume he's in exile now, although nobody seems to know where he is. The Putin and the people around him will be keen to maintain pressure on him, not to try to reinsert him in the way that he just rather disastrously did into the way Russia works. And keeping treason charges, or whatever the charges are, hanging over his head is a rather effective way of doing that.
Do you think beforehand, before we heard that, there was some, what was the nature of the deal that had been done between them, do you think?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. And I don't think many people, other than those directly involved, do. I mean, the whole story has been rather distorted in the way that it's appeared in the public prints. Presenting it as an attempted coup is almost certainly wrong. Prigozhin never had enough troops heading towards Moscow to actually take power in Russia. And what it seems to have happened is that as they got closer, it became clearer and clearer to them that they didn't quite know what to do when they got there. So that's part of it. But part of it is that there were things going on behind the scenes where he was offered a way out, which he took, knowing that he had little alternative. And the story that has also emerged today is that the Russian intelligence agencies apparently threatened various members of various Wagner leaders with problems for their families if the thing proceeded. So there's a lot of murk under the surface at the moment. I think the important fact is that Prigozhin lost, that he's off the scene. There's a big question mark about what happens with Wagner now, and that's probably the most interesting question mark left over. But Putin is left in charge, which he always really was. His authority dented, but by no means broken. It's worth recalling that the thing that effectively stopped Prigozhin was Putin's 5-minute statement on, I think, Saturday morning, basically saying this is a stab in the back, this is treason, this is mutiny, which made it very clear to Prigozhin and anyone who might be tempted to support him that they were up against the central figure in Russian politics, which is Putin, and therefore began the decay that happened. And Prigozhin also, as he emerged more into the limelight, he's a very popular guy, it has to be said. It's quite striking that the crowds in Rostov-on-Don actually cheered for him and his troops because he's seen as wanting to toughen up Russia's approach to the war. But it caused a number of people, in particular in the elite, but not only there, as they look at Putin's leadership, which hasn't been brilliant, but they look at Prigozhin as a possible alternative, and this is an important message for the West as well, need to wake up to how nasty things could turn if Putin actually fell.
Yeah, let me also just pick up on that point that you were alluding to about Putin and that 5-minute speech. Does it, in fact, what's happened then, make him look more powerful?
Well, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the whole thing is an immense embarrassment to Putin. Putin created Prigozhin and backed him. And I suspect he's rather sorry about what's happened because Prigozhin was a very effective spur on the rather slow and incompetent Russian military establishment. But when his Frankenstein's monster turned against him, he was pretty clear and pretty quick to make it clear that he wasn't going to have it. And it was his, as I've said, intervention, which was absolutely clear, which brought the whole sorry saga to a conclusion. Is he stronger? Well, his reputation is dented because Prigozhin was, in a sense, his creature, but he has demonstrated his absolute dominance over Russia's domestic political system.
And just quickly, you mentioned about Wagner and the future. What are your concerns around them particularly?
Well, Wagner were the most effective military formation fighting on the Russian side in Ukraine. And it's a major military loss to the Russians if somehow they are now removed from the scene. I suspect the attempt will be to actually incorporate them in the Russian armed forces. We are obviously at the moment when Ukraine is launching its much advertised counteroffensive, and this will diminish Russia's ability to stand up to it. And the Russians will be worried about that, obviously. I mean, this whole exercise, whatever else it may have done, have given the Ukrainians a real shot in the arm at a moment when their counteroffensive was beginning to look as if it was beginning to falter, to really push. And it's given the West all of these stories in the Times and elsewhere about how Putin's a busted flush, about how the whole regime is teetering and all of that. Nonsense, but nevertheless, those stories are running, has given the West extra encouragement to back the Ukrainians for as long as it takes. So it's not great news for Putin from that point of view.